So, it's the mid-19th century. There are no movies, no TV, and definitely no internet. Yeah, a person doesn't have many choices for entertainment. But one man would find a way to thrill the masses, even if it meant putting his life at stake. His name was William Leonard Hunt, better known as the Great Farini. 1852, Bowmanville, Ontario. The future stuntman, traveler, and inventor is a 14-year-old boy with big ambitions. He's decided he was made for performing, but his strict parents won't even let him go to the circus, probably the biggest form of entertainment at the time. Young Willie starts practicing with a copper wire in his backyard. He trains himself to walk across it. He also puts together a makeshift trapeze. When the traveling circus comes to town, Willie knows there's no way he can miss it. The performances fascinate him, so he starts practicing acrobatics. He masters rope walking, tumbling, and carrying heavy objects. His father is terrified by the idea that his son could waste his whole life doing this nonsense. So he strikes a deal with young Willie. He can continue having fun with his acrobatics if he goes into medical studies. But when Willie is 21 years old, his father takes a trip to England. With his old man gone, now is his chance. A local fair committee comes to see the young performer. They need to find out if he can tightrope walk over the Ganaraska River. You see, local fairs were losing their touch. The same old performances, same food, same everything. This guy could be that breath of exciting fresh air the fair desperately needed. He could be the man walking in the sky. Heh, it's a done deal. William Hunt had his awe-inspiring performance. Now he just needed a name to do the act justice and leave an imprint in people's minds. He once read about an adventurous Italian physician by the name of Luigi Carlo Farini. Inspired, he calls himself Signor Farini, later the Great Farini. The rope was tied from one 4-story building to another, 70 feet across the Ganaraska. The local newspaper announced this performance, calling it the Grand Ascension. It was a hit. Yet Farini wasn't the greatest. He was still number 2 to the great Blondin, who had walked a tightrope stretch over 1,000 feet across the Niagara River mere months before the Ganaraska stunt. Farini knew he had to up his game. He admired Blondin, but he surely wanted to outdo him. Blondin was a tough act to overcome. More experienced than Farini and 14 years his senior, Blondin didn't just do the stunts, he made it fun. He was an entertainer in the finest sense. He'd walk across the rope blindfolded, with his hands cuffed, carrying his manager, pushing a wheelbarrow, or with a sack over his body. The crazier, the better. Or he'd casually stop in the middle of the rope to cook an omelet and treat passengers on the Niagara tourist boats below. A year later, in 1860, Farini performed the same walk across the Niagara. He could pull off the same moves, covered with a sack, carrying someone, doing somersaults, and so on. But Farini one-upped his competitor by balancing on his head, hanging from the rope by his toes, and carrying a wash tub on his back. While walking, he even lowered a bucket into the river to gather some water for the washing. Blondin asserted that no one could perform his stunts. So, Signor Farini challenged his idol several times, wanting to compete over the Niagara. The great Blondin never accepted any of those challenges, one being that Farini would carry Blondin halfway down the rope and vice versa the rest of the way. No matter what Farini did, he could never get out of the great Blondin's shadow. Blondin was number 1, even in the eyes of royalty. The Prince of Wales and future King of England was blown away by Blondin's performance. He snubbed at Farini. Even though Blondin kept proving to be a great performer and held on to the number 1 spot, Farini actually made more money. Blondin needed to pass the hat to get money. Farini, though, was a natural at business. He managed to make an arrangement with regional railroads. He'd get a percentage of the tickets sold for each train heading to Niagara to see his show. Meanwhile, back at home, the more the young man achieved, his parents only got more disappointed in him. He wasn't the doctor his father wanted him to become. Without the support of his family, and losing the battle for the number 1 spot with Blondin, the great Farini charged ahead on his own. But not for long. In 1861, the 23-year-old got married to a beauty named Mary Osborne. The life of an acrobat's wife is hardly a usual one. The man trained her to hold on to his back during tightrope walks, and she became his performance partner. Until one tragic day the following year, when Mary lifted one hand to wave at the cheering crowd. She lost her balance and slipped, but Farini just managed to grab onto her dress with one hand. As he was pulling his young wife up, fate once again decided otherwise. Her dress suddenly ripped, and she fell. Farini was in shambles. But as they say, time heals all wounds. Things finally took a turn for the better in 1870, when he found the eighth wonder of the world, Lulu, a young acrobat from Paris. She performed in a 4,000-seat theater on the Champs-Élysées, leaping 25 feet in the air that would later grow to an unbelievable 40 feet. They'd become an unstoppable duo. The two traveled to England, then to the States, dropping jaws wherever they performed. During one performance, Farini nearly lost his precious Lulu. On that fateful day, the bar slipped from the acrobat's hand, and she fell to the ground. She was rushed to the hospital, and luckily, she survived. But then came the earth-shattering reveal. Lulu was in fact Farini's son in disguise. After the son got better, he continued to perform, but as himself now. The Royal Westminster Aquarium in London was once famous as a huge entertainment center. It ran into some financial difficulties, so they asked Farini to help. For some time, he worked as an inventor and came up with some crazy machinery to thrill spectators. He made and patented the first cannon that could fire people right up in the air. His human cannonball was a woman named Zazelle. She became as famous as Lulu before long. They soon left for America to join the greatest show on earth. Zazelle was the main star. Farini was quite the globetrotter. One of his trips brought him to the Kalahari Desert in 1885. That's where he became the first known Westerner to cross this desert on foot and live to tell the tale. That he did. He wrote a whole book about it. He claimed to have found the lost city of Kalahari, though that's not official since he never proved it. His son joined him on that trip, making sketches and taking photographs of their adventures. Even at 50 years old, he longed for the show. In 1888, he promoted aeronaut Thomas Scott Baldwin's daring 3,000-foot parachute jump from a hot air balloon. Some people say he must be one of the first to have ever used a parachute. Truly a leap of faith. Stunts weren't Farini's only interests. He took up oil painting later in life and turned out to be astonishing at it, his works being featured in the National Exhibition. He also had a knack for botany. Whenever he traveled, he'd bring back bulbs and seeds as souvenirs. He even published 2 books on plants and flowers. Thanks to a life of travel, he could speak 7 languages, well enough that he even translated some stories from German newspapers. Granted, he had the help of his wife, a German concert pianist named Anna Mueller, who he'd wed in 1886. As Farini got older, he started devoting his time and energy into other projects. He was a successful investor in the mining, railway, and other industries. He also got serious about inventing. He had over 30 patents for creations like can-packing machines, parts of steam boilers and engines, as well as gardening and theater equipment. A fortune teller once told Farini he'd live to see 100 years. She was close enough, he made it to 90, and probably wasn't bored a single day in his life.